Okay, Rick Perlstein, you wrote an article recently in the Washington Spectator called Sanders, Clinton, and the Democrats' Dilemma. And I have to say, it was great. It was a fascinating article. There were a lot of ideas in there I wanted to engage with. But the ones that intrigued me the most weren't even necessarily about this year's election. In it, you portray a kind of tectonic shift in the way the Democratic Party operates, kind of away from, I think you called them super jumbo ideas or really big ideas, to a kind of a party. Well, I don't want to mischaracterize your argument, but
Yeah,
am I
yeah,
basically getting it right?
yeah. I wrote a little pamphlet called "The Stock Ticker and the Super Jumbo," and my argument is that if the Democrats want to go back to what they were for most of the post-war period, which is really the dominant agenda-setting party of American politics, they need to go back to these ideas like Social Security, which is still manufacturing Democratic voters, 80 years after its invention. Medicare, which is still manufacturing Democratic votes 50 years later. Hopefully, Obamacare will be one of these things. The jury's still out on that. But my worry is that basically, no matter who wins the Democratic nomination, that the future of the party is worrisome because, well, if Bernie Sanders wins, um, he's he'll be governing as the head of a party that doesn't think like Bernie Sanders. There are no kind of big Bernie Sanders style ideas in the pipeline. And as I put it in the article, he'll basically be in the White House naked and alone.
Hmm.
And of course, if Hillary Clinton wins, one of her signature promises is that she's not going to raise taxes on anyone who makes less than $250,000, which is about 95. Only 5% of the population will be providing revenue, and we won't be able to afford uh, uh, basically gas. And I contrast that to the way the Democratic Party, operated for most of our lifetimes, in which, even at a time in which the legislative agenda was profoundly stalemated, which it was during basically the 3 years of John F. Kennedy's presidency, he passed nothing,
Hmm.
absolutely nothing, because of this conservative coalition of Southern reactionary Democrats and Northern reactionary Republicans. You still had senators and representatives basically uh, creating ideas that they put on the shelf ready to go should the political tide shift, which of course it did on November 22nd,
Right.
1963. And Lyndon Johnson became president and was able to kind of usher in this new era of social democracy in America on the goodwill that he was able to win. And, basically by 1966, by 1967, when we had urban riots and the backlash against all this kind of social legislation, liberalism was ready to go with another wave of great legislative achievements. You had the Automobile Safety Act, which was passed, thanks to Ralph Nader. You had this whole new realm of consumer legislation. You had the invention of OSHA. You had, bans on cigarette advertising, and all this stuff also had basically been in the makings since the 1950s. So that kind of preparation for the turn of the screw when those kinds of opportunities arise, which always is an unpredictable thing, it's just not happening. We have we have too many people in the Democratic Party who only see the trees and don't see the forests.
W-
We all kind of think like Ezra Klein and Nate Silver now.
Right,
We kind of
and I first of all, you make some great points about especially Nate Silver in this. I think we've got, I think there are a couple phenomena going on here that are important. I think one is, I call it, and I'm curious your thoughts about this, Rick Perlstein. I call it the myth of the technocrat, the
Mhm.
idea that there is a technocratic solution to the problems that face us that is value neutral and free of
Right.
ideology, which, in fact, that very belief, I would argue, is deeply laden with ideology and values, ones that I don't happen to share. The notion that in fact what we're really looking forward to is to reach even further back into history is a kind of
Yeah.
Mandarin class of the Democrats as a kind of I've been thinking of writing about this actually as a kind of Mandarin party
Yeah.
where you
Yeah.
pass the exams and then you manage the
Yes.
empire on behalf of the king.
Yeah. The
Rather than
efficient administration. Yeah, it's like like the Chinese mandarins. Yes,
right,
right. They spent like years and years and years and years learning Confucian principles, and then they get to go to the provincial capital and be a clerk, and then they get to go to Shanghai and be a clerk,
right.
and that those were not democratic societies,
Right.
right?
And I guess that's what I'm driving at. And your point is that the Democratic Party, even when it didn't have the power to enact legislation, as I understand your point, uh, articulated or adapted from independent movements or whatever, but throughout many decades, laid the groundwork over and over again for transformative ideas. And then when the opportunity came, it had those ideas ready, it had the groundwork prepared in the public mind, and it was able to enact them. That's your thesis, as I understand it.
Right, and that those movements often are unpredictable. Just to take an example, there was a major piece of basically the first change in how drugs were regulated in about 60 years that passed in 1967, and this was after the thalidomide scare.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had basically the first bill, the first law to regulate automobile safety, and that happened, also in 1967, and it happened because basically Ralph Nader wrote a book. He testified before Congress, and it turned out that General Motors spied on him and was
Right.
so embarrassed that basically Ralph Nader had Congress eating out of his hand and was able to, basically call the tune. And, there were enough people who had, you know, basically, they call it what do they call it? They call it a turnkey, a turnkey solution,
Right.
right? They
Right.
had the legislation ready to go, and through the 60s and 70s, this happened over and over. The 1970 Clean Air Act amendments, which uh, literally demanded that all the four major auto companies create basically fuel efficiency standards by their 1975 model years, whether they had the current technology and resources to do it or not. Basically, Abraham Ribicoff, who was a senator from Connecticut, very liberal, Edmund Muskie, the senator from Maine, said, "This is so important to the well being of the country. We don't care whether or not you say you can do it. We are going to mandate this." And the auto industry just kind of had no choice but to go along with this, and that's the only reason the big car companies were forced to create fuel efficient vehicles. And if you had said in 1969, well, Richard Nixon was just nominated as president, so calling for these kinds of air industry standards is Green Lanternism. You
Right.
familiar with that phrase,
Green
RJ?
Lanternism, yeah. Green Lanternism
I
meaning
hate
the
it.
mocking phrase used by Ezra Klein. By the way, I'm deeply offended not only by Green Lanternism, which is a phrase, as I understand it, suggesting that the president is somehow a superhero and you're suggesting the president can do magical things if you're proposing a transformative presidency, but also by his dismissal of, for example, Medicare single payer as puppies and rainbows, as if
Right.
another phrase that I hate because it suggests to me that providing people with affordable health care is
A
a
basic right.
naive and childish idea when it exists in every other country but ours, every other developed
Right.
country but ours. Anyway, Green Lanternism. Did I define it correctly?
That's exactly what Green Lanternism is. And Green Lanternism is, Franklin Roosevelt. Green Lanternism is Lyndon Johnson. Green Lanternism is Ronald Reagan. It's Newt Gingrich. I heard a liberal journalist whose name I won't use in a discussion I was having with him saying, "Why is Zephyr Teachout running for Congress when even if she wins, all she's going to be able to do is give speeches as a member of this, toothless, powerless minority in Capitol Hill?" And I was thinking to myself, "Wow, you can't imagine a conservative saying in 1990, why should I run for Congress? Because I'm only going to be able to give speeches in the House of Representatives that's controlled by the Democrats." No, no, they took over Congress, and they weren't giving just speeches in a minority by 1995. They were ripping down the Great Society. They were ripping down the New Deal. Uh, and that's the way that Democrats need to get back to. Unfortunately, one of the candidates in this presidential race, whose name happens to be Clinton, uh, talks as if her most valuable promise to the electorate is not to raise their hopes too high.
Right. Right.
Uh,
And to actively mock those who do, which, by the way, was her
yes,
posture in
actively mock those who do.
Now,
Right.
and if I can just jump in real quick, if she wins, she'll be presumably up against a candidate who is willing to say, as insipid as it may sound to some people, we can make America great again. So she's actually. I think she's going to be fighting headwinds if she keeps that attitude. I did also want to get in, by the way, that my response to the Green Lantern comments at the time was to mock what I called helpless president lit, kind of like the literature of romance novels where there's a heroine is trapped in a tower and the waves are rising, that somehow the president and everyone else in the electoral process is a helpless victim of forces greater than themselves. I think you're saying, and I certainly believe that's exactly what we need to get away from. So we got about 30 seconds left. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, if Trump is running to make America great again, Hillary Clinton seems to be saying, "I'll make sure America isn't all that bad," and that's just not responsible politics, and it's not, it's really not an accurate assessment of the objective reality of the historical situation. Even though she claims to be kind of the candidate of objective reality, it fails, 6 ways to Sunday,
Well,
and I really hope she changes her tune.
I do.
That's the best we can hope from her.
No, I think that's a great summary. But although I do look forward to the bumper stickers that say, "Hey, it could be worse,"
I think it's going to be her bumper sticker is going to be building a bridge to the 20th century. And
that's
we can't have that.
I can't beat that line. All right, Rick Perlstein, writer and historian and jazz pianist. Thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks, brother.
You bet.